So, welcome everyone. My name is Jennifer Clark. I'm the manager of programs and operations for the New York State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And welcome to today's Legislative Day of Action prep webinar. With that, I'll hand things over to Joan Gerhart.
Thank you, Jennifer, so much. I'd like to make sure everyone's aware we have Shannon Wong also with us from Niskative staff today. And Jennifer and Shannon will be assisting me with facilitating today's webinar, as well as checking the chat and making sure I don't miss anything. So hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Joan Gerhart. I am the Director of Public Policy and Advocacy at Niskative. And I'm so thrilled to be with you today to prepare for next week's Legislative Day of Action. Hopefully that's on your calendar already. If you're here today, I'm assuming it already is. It's going to be an all-day event. Those of you who are joining us in Albany, we expect to start at around 10. And for others who are planning to participate from their offices or their home offices, you can participate any time of day, all day, an hour for the day, whatever. It's pick your own adventure. So why don't we get started? We do have quite a bit of information to cover with you today. What I'd like to start is with today is some very high level messaging. What we really want legislators to know about domestic violence. Every legislator, no matter whom you're meeting with, no matter what you intend to convey, these are the top points we want legislators to remember after hearing from you or meeting with you. Then we're going to take a look at 5 priority bills that Shannon and I have identified for our Day of Action focus. One relates to the COLA. We have Kira's Law. We have a bill regarding reimbursement for housing and shelter called the Safe Shelter Act. We have a bill on coerced debt and a brand new bill, which I'm kind of excited about. I'm excited about all of them, of course, but this one's pretty exciting too, to prevent stalking via vehicle navigation systems. And once we review all of that information, we'll take a look a little more closely at our social media plan, as well as event logistics for those of you who are joining with us physically in Albany. And I'd like to say too, if you are participating today, but are not able to attend in person in Albany, please feel free when we move to the event logistics section to drop off if that information is is not relevant to you. So let's go ahead and start with what we want legislators to know. And all of this should be a breeze for you. This should roll off your tongue. This information I'm sure you've been hearing about quite a bit, at least for the last couple of years. We know that domestic violence impacts millions of victims in New York alone. And we know that because New York continues to have the highest demand for domestic violence services in the country, according to the national survey that's done every year by the National Network to End Domestic Violence. We have nearly 10,000 victims every day obtaining services on one day. That was the number from last year. Nearly 10,000 victims. That's really astronomical. And of course, more troubling than that number is the number of people who can't get the help that they're looking for. And that's thousands more. In that national census in New York on that one day, more than 1,000 victims sought services and couldn't get them. And why is that? It's not because we don't want to help them, but it's because we have not enough staff. We don't have enough resources. Maybe the program that they were looking for has been canceled, or maybe it was full. We don't have the resources to have another complement of programming. Whatever reason, we have on any given day, more than 1,000 victims not getting the help they need. So this is really a tipping point. I think when we saw such a dramatic increase in the demand for domestic violence services at the pandemic, we were all hoping that this level of demand would start to decline when we move out from the pandemic, which certainly doesn't mean people aren't getting COVID anymore, but we're all back to work, where there's some kind of return, although it's not the same, to, workforce dynamics and people out in shelter and people looking for services. But we haven't seen that demand decrease. It continues to trend upward. So we really are at a tipping point where domestic violence programs really can't provide the survivor-centered, trauma-informed services we all want to provide to everyone who's seeking them. And that's because there's not enough funding to meet the demand, and there's low wages, which means our staff continues to transition to better opportunities in terms of payment across the board. And we still see that all over New York State. I just want to make a note of funding and the timing for our day of action. You're probably aware that the state budget was approved a couple of weeks ago. Last year, when we had our legislative day of action, it was held a day after that state budget was approved. So much of our messaging was still focused on funding. While we do still want legislators to understand that funding for domestic violence services and to our agencies has been flat funded for years, even with the VOCA money in this last state budget, that doesn't give us more money than we've had. This keeps us level funded. And that's a really important point, because as the demand increases, you would think that the state would be investing more heavily in our services. That's not the case. We continue to get the same level of funding across all of our line items. And that's why we have a shortage of resources and staff. So I think it might be important to make that, to convey that message during our meetings and outreach with legislators. But we also want to be thankful, grateful even, for the VOCA money that was put in the state budget and approved, because without that, we would all be looking at very significant cuts across the board. So in that context, we want legislators to know that they can help us and they can help domestic violence survivors by investing in critical services, life-sustaining services, to ensure that all survivors get the support they need and can move forward, whatever that looks like to them. So now I'm going to quickly check the chat. I don't think there's anything in there. I'm going to move on to talk about the 5 bills that we're going to be focused on for Legislative Day of Action. And just a word about the information I'm going to convey here. This is a lot of information. No one expects any advocate on the call today to convey all of this information to every legislator. That's not the intention. Every legislator that we either communicate with by email or meet with will get a slew of information. There'll be a letter that has these bills described. There'll be Niskadev's memos of support provided that gives even more information about each bill. They'll get that information. What we're really looking to bring to their attention when we meet with them and talk to them is the stories about our work, whether that's a survivor story, anonymously, of course, or a story of the challenges from a service provider perspective, the challenges of doing the work, the challenges of being a domestic violence survivor, local statistics, local flavor, what you're all seeing in your communities. That's it's really important to convey during your meetings. I do want you all to be aware of the bills that we are prioritizing. And you can pick and choose if there is one or two that you're particularly interested in. Focus on that. But it's not necessary to go through a litany of information about these 5 bills in each of your meetings. So the first bill I want to talk about is Kira's Law. We've been talking to all of you about Kira's Law for several years. I'm thrilled that Jacqueline Franchetti is here with us today and will be in Albany with us next week. So shout out, Jacqueline. Um, on each of these bills, I'm giving you the bill numbers for reference. I don't think you really need the bill numbers, but if anyone's interested in actually seeing the bill text, just let me or Shannon know. Our emails are at the end of the slides, and you will be getting a copy of the slides. And we're happy to send you along the full bill text if you wanted to review it. So what does Kira's Law do? Kira's Law has gone through a number of iterations since it was first introduced, but it was introduced to really focus our Supreme and family courts on a number of tragedies that have occurred during child custody and visitation proceedings. Now, you might be familiar with the story of Kira Franchetti, beautiful little girl, as you can see, who was murdered by her father during an unsupervised court-approved visit in 2016, despite the pleas of Kira's mom for the court to take the child's safety, Kira's safety, into consideration. Since then, 35 more children have been murdered by a parent in New York during custody proceedings. This means that our family courts are failing these children and failing domestic violence survivors. Why is that? It's because they're minimizing or outright dismissing allegations of domestic violence, child abuse, and child neglect. So the purpose of Kira's Law is to require the court to conduct a hearing at the initiation of a proceeding when allegations of domestic violence or child abuse are made, for the court to hear evidence. So this is an evidentiary hearing, and make findings on whether either of the parties to that litigation pose a risk to that child's safety. And if so, requires the court to issue a temporary order of custody or visitation that has limitations on that party's contact with the child. So this is a really important bill. And I would say, there's great news to report today because we just got the C version of Kira's Law. And this is the bill that I think resolves much of the concerns that had been raised with earlier versions, which is not unusual. Not unusual for concerns to be raised about various aspects of a bill when it's been introduced. But at this point, I believe we have resolved the vast majority of questions raised about Kira's Law. And in my view, Kira's Law is now ready for passage. So what does Kira's Law do? Like I said, it requires the courts to conduct this hearing of domestic violence, child abuse, and child neglect if any of the parties request it at the initiation of a custody or visitation proceeding. Now, if neither party requests that, they can still do so later during the proceeding, but this ensures that if there's a concern raised early on, then the court has to act by holding a hearing. And then whatever the court does after that hearing, each party has a right to appeal. So there would be a right to appeal whether the court issued a temporary or final order, denied a temporary or final order, or the terms of those orders. So that's really new and exciting. In cases involving domestic violence or child abuse, the court cannot issue joint custody. There's a rebuttable presumption that there be no joint custody. And rebuttable presumption means that the court assumes that to be true. So assumes that it cannot issue joint custody. unless either of the parties rebut it by presenting more evidence to say, no, in this particular case, joint custody is appropriate. But the court's first stance would be no joint custody in cases involving domestic violence and child abuse. And in those same cases, the court cannot find that one parent is alienating children from the other parent, which we know impacts domestic violence survivors much more than abusers. So this would remove the ability for abusers to use this tactic against their victims in court. And finally, the bill requires enhanced training for judges, court referees, and other hearing officers. There is already a very minimal training requirement for judges, but this is a much more comprehensive training, and the training topics to be included are laid out in the bill. So very important. So I saw some activity, Shannon, in the chat. Is there something specific on Kira's law that I should be answering before we move on?
Yeah. Carla's wondering, was it court approved visits or court mandated visits that would be
Or-
impacted?
Oh, is Carla asking specifically about the situation with Kira or generally? Because what Kira's law does is it essentially, it does what it says about supervised visitation is that if the court determines that one party poses a risk to the child's safety, then that judge would have to order either supervised visitation or visitation that has appropriate protections to ensure the child's safety.
And
And Kira
Jacqueline notes, and Jacqueline notes that Kira was on a court-ordered visit when she was murdered.
Thank you. Well, and thank you, Carla.
And then there's a question here about, does the court require a scientific method to prove alienation? And you might want to, unpack a little bit some of the protections we've created in the bill.
Well, I don't want to get too down in the weeds on Kira's law about the specifics. There is no definition for parental alienation in the bill. The language is that the court cannot find that one party is alienating the children from the other party. We did have earlier language about evidence-based practices with respect to these types of, theories, unscientific. That language has been removed from the bill, and we focused on the behavior. And we think that that's a better approach, focusing on the behavior, than trying to get a definition for parental alienation within statute, which could also change over time. And, that's not something we would necessarily want to be held to, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, if there are new definitions in place. So I hope that answers the question there. And I see Azalea's question about, shouldn't judges already be doing this? Yes, judges should be already protecting the safety of children, and they don't, which is why we have seen such horrific tragedies occur in the midst of child custody and visitation proceedings. There's lots of reasons for that, not the least of which is that the court typically kicks any discussions of domestic violence or child abuse down the road. It could be months, if not years, before the judge ever hears any allegations of domestic violence or child abuse, saying, you'll have your time to tell me about this, just not now. And in that period of time, abusers have access to children with very little limitations on their access. And that's when these traumatic events, and even children, who, thank God, are not murdered, that doesn't mean children are not harmed by spending time unsupervised with their children. So I think I'd like to move on now, because I don't want to get too lost in Kira's law, but we can talk more at the end if we have time for questions. I hope we do. So our second bill is called the Securing Access to Fair and Equal Shelter, or the Safe Shelter Act. And this bill is currently in the two finance committees. So it's in the Assembly Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee. And I forgot to mention with Kira's law, that bill is in both judiciary committees in the Assembly and Senate. And why it's important what committee it's in is because when you meet with legislators, one of the things I'm going to ask you to do is take a look at the committees that legislator sits on. And if they're on a committee where one of these bills you're going to be talking about resides, it's important to ask them to talk to the committee chair to move that bill onto an agenda. So what does the Safe Shelter bill do? Why do we need it? Currently, if a single survivor is placed in shelter in a room that's meant for two, whether that's two adults or an adult and child, then the shelter only gets reimbursed for the one bed where the individual is sleeping. That's our per diem reimbursement model. So per diem, every night that an individual is in shelter, the shelter provider gets paid for that one bed on that one night. So that creates a financial incentive for shelters to prioritize housing families so they have people in all of their beds rather than single individuals. If a program actually puts an individual in a double occupancy room, they stand to lose almost $21,000 for the maximum 180 stay in shelter that a survivor can stay. $21,000, that's a lot of money. So what the Safe Shelter Act would do is would require the state to reimburse domestic violence shelter providers for both beds when a single individual is housed in a double occupancy room. So essentially providing reimbursement based on the room rather than the bed. And this would eliminate any financial incentive that shelters have to prioritize families over individual. And I just want to make the point, no one is suggesting here that shelter providers are making inappropriate decisions with respect to who to shelter. I'm certainly not implying that, because I believe that shelter providers will always provide housing for those who need it when they can. But this is just an issue of fairness to ensure that a domestic violence program does not get dinged financially for deciding to house an individual in that double occupancy room.
And you'll see in the chat, Joan, that Carla's noting that like sometimes, domestic violence service providers are making a choice to put folks who have been particularly traumatized into a single unit so that they can heal in a way that is appropriate for them.
Thank you, Carla. That's a horrific situation, but thank you for elevating that. And this bill would make shelter more accessible, not only to individual adults, but also to, the individuals who are in already marginalized communities, such as LGBTQ individuals and older survivors. So any questions on that? I don't see any. So we will move on to our third bill, which is our COLA bill. So some of you might know that we were advocating really heavily for domestic violence advocates to receive a cost of living adjustment on their state contracts in this year's New York State budget. Now, as you know, New York State relies on us as nonprofit domestic violence agencies to provide critical services to domestic violence victims. And this work comes at a cost, right? And it's incumbent on New York State, if they want us to do this work on their behalf, to value the work and pay for it. However, domestic violence advocates have never received a cost of living adjustment on our state-issued contracts. This is despite the fact that other human service workers, particularly those in the healthcare sector, have received multiple COLAs. They received another one this year. So since there is a group of human service workers that are included in the COLA group, who have received a COLA 5 times since that group was established back in 2006, I believe. My phone is ringing. Just trying to turn it. Um, so despite our best efforts, we have been unable to get domestic violence advocates included in that group. And that failure has led to hundreds of vacancies across our programs, all across the state. I think you're all pretty familiar with the impacts of not being able to pay all of our advocates living wages. And what we've seen most recently, we've always lost great people to academia or even to, some other human service work. So they can, individuals can still be mission oriented, but maybe get paid a little more money. But what we're seeing now is even within our own organizations, particularly larger organizations that are umbrella organizations that have a domestic violence program and then other human service work within it, that we're seeing our people, move from our bureau or department over to other human service departments within umbrella organizations. And that's really unfortunate too. We need to be paying our people living wages. So there was a bill introduced by Senator Prasad and Assemblyman Hevesi that would ensure not only domestic violence advocates, but also any program that received an OVS VOCA grant, so our VOCA subgrantees, as well as, and it's not on the slide, but I do want to point out, as well as rape crisis centers who are certified by Department of Health, they would receive the COLA when one is offered by the state to other human services workers. So the bill wouldn't require a COLA every year. But what it essentially says is when the state is issuing a COLA for some human service workers, it should include DV advocates, VOCA subgrantees, and advocates working at rape crisis centers. It also would require state agencies to look back 5 years to ensure that any uncovered program that should be included is included in future COLAs. So we believe this is an issue of equity. It's an issue of valuing the work. This is hard work, challenging work. And we shouldn't have advocates having to work 2 jobs so that they can continue doing this great work. Any questions, Shannon?
I was just going to type an answer about whether to do this in the budget or outside of the budget. And I was sort of going to say we worked very hard on the COLA during the budget, but there is it can be done either way. These bills could have passed as a component of the budget or they can pass separately. So we fought for them in the budget. We will fight for them now, and we will probably be back again for them if we don't get them through the session in the budget. If does that sound right, Joe?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I believe this does have a pretty significant cost attached to it. So I think it's very likely it would only pass as part of the budget. The reason for us to be talking about it now is because we weren't included in the state budget that just got passed. So the message that we want to deliver on COLAs is this is critical for us. And you, legislator, need to work doubly hard next year to ensure this is included in the budget next year. We can't wait to be talking about this during next year's legislative session. We need to be talking about it now, with legislators now, with the governor's office now, and with staff now. So it gets included in the governor's executive budget, which is issued in January. So I hope that answers the question. Okay, so moving on, Assemblywoman Rosenthal introduced a great bill last year to protect domestic violence survivors from coerced debt. This bill is in the Assembly Codes Committee, and in the Senate, it's in the Judiciary. And we have seen this bill start to move within committees, so that could indicate some desire to see this passed before the end of session. There's only like this month left of session. Session ends the first week in June. So there's going to be a crash. It's going to be chaos. It's already chaos to try to get a whole bunch of bills done before the end of legislative session. But this very well might be one that passes. So the background here, I think you probably know, is coerced debt impact a lot of victims. Economic abuse occurs in 99% of domestic violence cases. That's according to an NNEDV survey. It's one of the primary reasons that survivors cite for staying in an abusive relationship. So coerced debt refers to all the non-consensual credit-related transactions that an abuser might put in motion, again, without that victim's consent. So that destroys a survivor's credit rating. It might make it difficult for them to get future loans, rent an apartment, even get a job. So coerced debt could include if an abuser tries to take out a credit card in their victim's name. Maybe it's forcing the victim to take out the credit card. So there's that threat of force. Making a victim sign various financial documents obligating them to debt. Even refinancing a home mortgage without their consent, or again, forcing them to sign that paperwork. Those are all examples of coerced debt. So what this bill would do, it would ensure that survivors are not held liable for any coerced debt. So anything that they were not aware of when it was obtained by an abuser, or if they were forced to sign to obtain, like a loan. And it would essentially prohibit creditors, so the people who would get the money, from enforcing a consumer debt that's incurred by this fraud or intimidation, even identity theft. So what would happen is a victim would provide notice to the creditor that the debt that they're seeking is actually coerced debt. And they would fill out a form to say, I believe this to be coerced debt. And they would include some documentation along with that form, include a police report, an identity theft report, a court order, or some verification by a third party. And we're probably all accustomed to third-party verifications. It could be an advocate, an attorney, a law enforcement official, a doctor or psychologist, even a clergy person. So then that information goes into the creditor, and the creditor has to do an investigation. And the bill spells out specific procedures and timelines for their investigation. So when a victim lodges a complaint, the creditor has 10 business days to essentially tell any consumer reporting agency, hey, you can't go after this individual for this debt because we're working on an investigation. Then the creditor has 30 days to complete their review. And then there's required notice that would go out in certain timeframes once their investigation is complete. And the victim would get written notification of the finding of that investigation. And there's some really great survivor-centered language in this bill regarding ensuring that creditors are not contacting the abuser during this investigation. And it's also only using contact information that is provided by the victim, so that the victim has said, you can communicate with me this way, but not any other way. And the other thing that the bill does is creates a right of action for victims to seek justice in court if the creditors or if the credit agencies are not acting the way that this bill describes. So whether they don't conduct an investigation, if the investigation was faulty, or if a credit report agency doesn't correct their paperwork, their files on a victim once they were informed that this debt is coerced. All of those things could be the basis for a right of action that the victim has. Anything on that bill, Shannon?
Jacqueline's just pointing out the sort of costs, that would be interesting to acknowledge or point out the cost of um, stop checks of child support and the impact of that, and how difficult it is to get agencies to write letters to support victims and their needs.
We have been trying to move our statute to no longer require these third-party attestations and instead rely on survivors' attestations, so their self-attestation. I think with this, because it's financial, it's debt, and it involves banks, I'm not sure we would be able to get as low a bar as self-attestation, but it's something we can talk about.
Just keep going, and I'll keep reviewing the chat and flag them at the end if we need to.
Okay, great. So our final bill is a new bill introduced also by Assembly Member Rosenthal and just introduced in the Senate by Senator Gounardis, which will prevent or hopefully prevent is a strong word.
Yeah, that I'm seeing an ability to
prevent stalking via remote car technology. And this bill is in the Consumer Affairs and Protection Committees in both chambers. So I don't know if you've seen the coverage in the New York Times on this. There have been some other national news focusing in on this. But essentially, it's abusers getting smart on how they can utilize car navigation systems to stalk their victims. So we know how rampant stalking is. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men have been stalked during their lives. And now we're seeing stalking behavior in people's cars. And most concerning is tracking down a victim's location through their car navigation system. So if anyone's interested in that New York Times article, it's called "Your Car is Tracking You. Abusive Partners May Be Too." And I'd be happy to provide you with a copy of that. Or Shannon, I don't know if you could drop the link for that in the chat. But it was a really good piece and it's gotten a lot of people talking because essentially a victim tried to get a car dealership to completely remove the navigation system in her vehicle that she was she legally owned the vehicle by court order. And they refused to remove it. And that continued her abuser's ability to stalk her through that car. So essentially, the bill would permit domestic violence victims to get car manufacturers and dealers to terminate an abuser's access to the car's remote technology. So it would not remove the navigation system like the victim was seeking in the New York Times article, but it would just eliminate the ability for an abuser to access the remote technology. In order to make that request, the victim would have to show that they legally own the car, and they do, in this case, have to show a valid order of protection. And then once that request is made, then the car manufacturer has 2 days to remove the abuser from that navigation system, and they cannot charge the victim for doing that work. So a pretty simple bill. It's not very involved or complicated. It's brand new. We're pretty excited about it. So we're trying to elevate awareness about this issue. And I'm not sure this would actually move this year because it is so new, but maybe sending this in our sites next year. Shannon, were you going to say something?
No, I'm
Oh,
just back channeling or chatting with one of the questions in the chat related to how the investigations would unfold and third party investigations. But I think in the interest of time, we should keep moving along.
okay. All right. So those are our 5 bills. I'd now like to move on to talk a little bit about our engagement. So let's start with our social media. I hope that, advocating on social media it has become maybe easy, maybe routine. We're trying to get our word out on social media more and more about what we're looking for. We're going to help make it real easy, like we always do. We're developing a toolkit, which is going to have sample posts, sample scripts, sample emails to send to legislators. If you're not able to be with us in Albany, even if you are, take pictures, take a selfie, wear purple, right? That's our day color. Um, so take a selfie of yourself, whether it's with a legislator, whether it's with another advocate in your office, upload it to social media on Tuesday. Let's let everyone know that it's, Domestic Violence Awareness Day in New York State. And like I said, there'll be samples for every kind of platform, whether you're on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn. I know I'm an old fogey when I up LinkedIn. Uh, but we will be circulating that toolkit very shortly. It will be up on, we'll circulate it on our director's listserv, and it will also be posted on our webpage on the initiative.org website dedicated to our legislative day of action. So all of our materials, everything you need to prep will be on that webpage, which will be circulated shortly. So with respect to in-person event logistics, I'm not going to walk you through this. This is a parking map just to show you that if you cannot get into the P3 parking lot under the concourse, which is, can you see my cursor or no? You
Uh-huh.
can't? Okay. So this is the P3 visitors lot. I have noted that that lot is getting full earlier and earlier each day. If you arrive to Albany after, I'm going to say 8:30 in the morning, it's likely that that's going to be full. So we wanted to provide you with some additional parking options, particularly parking here at the Pepsi Arena, which is a very large garage. And then there's a walkway here that gets you essentially to the Empire State Plaza. So you can see it there. So I put it here. So knowing that you are going to get the slides, it will also be on our webpage if you needed to take another look at it. I highly suggest that you carpool if you're coming with other people from your program or your community. But there are some parking opportunities. They all cost money. If you go into the P3 lot, it is a $10 a day lot. There are machines, little parking machines at the elevator that you have to put your ticket in and pay by credit card. So if you have any questions about parking, just reach out to Shannon and she can help you get where you need to be.
My email will be at the end, or I'll put it in the chat in 1 second. We've got
Yeah.
we're working our chat pretty good here.
Oh, good. Okay. So in terms of our agenda, we are going to have our rooms open. We are in the meeting rooms off the concourse, meeting rooms 2 and 3. So follow signs. Actually, if you come up in the elevator from the concourse parking, it's a direct shot. You're going to be right there at the meeting rooms, which is great. So we're going to be starting officially at around 10. So that gives folks time to get in and get oriented, find where we're going. So the meeting rooms are not through security. So you don't have to leave extra early in the morning to get through security. Where our morning program is outside of security in the concourse where all of the food restaurants are. If you've been to the LOB area and you know where that is, that's where our meeting rooms are. Our morning program is called Bringing Advocacy to Light. We're going to have a number of legislators join us. We already have confirmed Assemblymember Rosenthal, Assemblyman Hevesy, Senator Skoufis, and we have invitations out to 5 others. And they're all going to be talking about why advocacy is so important and talking to constituents is so important from their perspective. We also are going to have a presentation by Jacqueline Franchetti, who I said earlier is here today, and she'll be with us next week. And she'll be talking about Kira's Law and how she was propelled into advocacy and, what she has learned over her time in doing that. And then we're going to wrap that program up at around 11:45. And from that point, we're all going to coalesce into a group and we're going to march together, hopefully holding posters, tote bags. Everyone's going to get a purple pashmina this year. So yay, the purple pashminas are back. And we also have purple pocket squares, if anyone prefers a pocket square to a pashmina. Oh, thank you, Shannon.
They were just sitting right there.
So we're going to march through, and Shannon's going to lead us in some chanting as we march. We are going to have to go through security, so we will temporarily hold on chanting as we're going through security because we don't want law enforcement to be nervous about what we're planning. And then we will, sort of recongregate on the inside of security and continue marching through the Capitol to the $1 Million Staircase, where we will take our group photo at 12:30. And just if you've been in the Capitol before and are familiar with the $1 Million Staircase, we are not going up to the 3rd floor. At least the plan right now is to take that group photo right on the 1st floor. So no need to use the elevators. And then for the rest of the afternoon, we're going to be meeting with legislators. We know that each chamber, the Senate and Assembly, are going to be passing resolutions. We hope that they're also going to be passing domestic violence related bills. If we have timing for that, then we will certainly send out an email to everyone who is with us for the day. We just don't know what that timing might be yet. I have no idea when session will be next Tuesday. So as we get that information, we'll shoot that out to all of you. A couple of things on the legislative meetings. We are going to be asking you to sign up for meetings like we did for Budget Advocacy Day. So those of you who participated for Budget Advocacy Day, this will be old hat, but we are going to be circulating a sign-up genius, which lists all of our meetings for the day, and you will sign up as a meeting attendee. You can sign up for as many or as few meetings as you like. Please be aware that, you need to leave yourself some time to get from one meeting room to another meeting room. Most meetings do last about 20 to 25 minutes. Boy, they do not go over that 30-minute look. So depending on how you're scheduling, where your meetings are, you might be able to do back-to-back, or you might want to only schedule yourself for meetings like on the hour or on the half hour to give you a little bit of time to get to the next location. Every meeting is going to have an assigned group leader. Shannon and I are assigning group leaders. If anyone wants to volunteer for that, let us know. It does involve facilitating the meeting. I think group leaders should have some background in meeting with legislators and familiarity with the legislative office building as well as the Capitol. If this is your first time joining us for Day of Action, probably likely you shouldn't be a group leader this year for your first time. Maybe prepare and hope to do that in the future. So when we circulate that list, there'll be more detailed instructions into how to fill out the Sign Up Genius. But like I said, you can sign up for as many or as few meetings as you'd like, and you can end your day when you like. I do also want to point out that both breakfast and lunch are on your own schedule. Since our meeting room is located in the concourse, there are some food opportunities. I'd say not a lot. They're going through a transition, let's put it that way, in the concourse. There's a deli, which is pretty good. There's a burger place, Herbie's Burgers. Um, there might be an Asian place, I think, still in there. There's also food trucks outside, which since we are on the outside of security, it makes it a little easier to run outside and get to a food truck. But that all depends on how much time you have before your meeting starts to grab lunch. It's always a good idea to bring some snacks and water with you through security so that if you do get caught, if you do want to attend more meetings, you don't have to come back out from security to grab a bite to eat.
And comfortable shoes because there's lots of walking.
Thank you, Shannon. Comfortable shoes, that's for sure. So I already said wear purple, right? You're going to be getting scarves. You're going to have the tote bags, but whatever makes you comfortable. If you'd like to wear purple, we do want to make the legislature aware of our presence. And a great way to do that is by wearing purple. I already said we're going to march to the Capitol. I think I've already covered these two slides. I see we're pretty close to the end, so I'm going to breeze through that. There is a map here of the concourse. That's this big white column here. And this is the Egg. If anyone is familiar with Albany, this is a performing arts venue. And our meeting rooms are right here. So it's between the concourse and the Egg.
And I'll just say again, if you end up parking in the MVP arena, which is, I think, referred to as the Pepsi arena in the earlier visual, you sort of follow that hallway. You'll enter by that Egg. So you'll make a left into that Egg area, and then you'll go straight up that hallway and then make another left.
And then here is security in this legislative lobby. And then all of the meetings that you have will be scheduled, most in the legislative office building, some in the Capitol. So those are the two locations for meetings. So I already covered all of that. And so how to prepare? Okay, so to prepare, like I said, we're going to be circulating a lot of information. All of it's going to be on our webpage. There'll be talking points, summaries of our priorities, our memos in support. Take a look at which committees your legislators sit on. If any of the bills you plan to discuss are in those committees, you want to ask them to sponsor that. In all cases, you want to ask legislators to support these bills. And like I said, identify on the ones that are most important to you. And then gather whatever local information, statistics, facts, stories that you hope to share within your meeting. Everyone will have an opportunity in every meeting to speak. However, if you prefer to just attend and not speak, maybe just provide your name and agency or what brought you to the meeting, that's fine too. And you will go over that with your group leader who will meet you outside of the meeting location. And this just describes some of the information in the folders that you will be getting when you arrive in Albany. You'll get the agenda for the day, our legislative priorities, the talking points, all of this you'll have access to electronically in advance. A legislative bill status that shows all of the bill sponsors on a particular bill and has the specific asks you'll be making, if they are a sponsor, if they're not. Tips to effective lobbying, that map of the plaza, and then the materials that we're giving to legislators, which is a letter, our memos of support, and information about the census. So we only have a couple of minutes left. I had some tips here for effective advocacy. Make sure everyone's introduced, share your stories, personalize the issue for legislators. But be honest about the work. Don't argue with them. If they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, that's fine. Just offer to follow up and let someone from NISCATIV know after the meeting that you received this question, and we'd be happy to follow up or give you the information you need to follow up. And above all else, thank them for their support. So the last thing I wanted to mention too is during Budget Advocacy Day, we did have a number of participants run into some offices doing literature drops or lit drops, which is just a quick run into the office, dropping off some literature with the individual who's sitting closest to the door, whether that's the receptionist or the intern. And we'll have a script for you, very easy script to use if you want to do literature drops to any office, really, or if you're local legislators, if we're not meeting with them on Tuesday, but you'd like to just stop by and drop off the materials, that's really great if you wanted to do that. So here is our emails. And before I switch to our last slide, which is our thank you for coming, Shannon, do we have any other questions we should be addressing?
We're just going to try to, our goal is to get our materials up on the website sometime this week, so people will be able to access them there. I know some people have asked me about getting the slides soon. We're going to try to do those things.
And a recording of today's webinar will be available probably tomorrow, and we will circulate that. So if there are others who are joining you or from your agency who are coming, they should be able to listen to this webinar too.
And Michelle would like to know if there's a same as on the Carnev bill, I think. And yes, there is. We literally, that's one of the reasons our materials are slightly held up, is that we have to go back and add the same as on that. That's Gennardis's bill, and it's Senate Bill 9174. He just picked up that bill very recently.
Okay, and I see we have a request for from Lee for Kira's Law. We'll get that for you. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. Let us know if you have any questions before Tuesday, whether you are participating remotely or with us in Albany. Thank you for your willingness to participate. I look forward to working with everyone on Tuesday.
And don't hesitate to email with questions. I'm happy to field them as we get closer and closer to the day.
So long, Neil.